Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping into a whole stack of sources today, really peeling back the layers on this very public and, frankly, pretty dramatic fallout.
Yeah, between former President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, it's been quite the spectacle.
Definitely. Playing out across headlines, social media, it's been everywhere the last few days.
And our sources, they capture the key moments, the accusations flying back and forth, and honestly, some pretty surprising details that have surfaced.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to walk you through these sources. We'll unpack the timeline, try to pinpoint the core disagreements.
Including some serious allegations that have become a big part of the story.
Exactly. And see what insights this whole saga offers for you.
Oh.
Okay, let's unpack this. So first off, the sources we've gathered, they make it pretty clear that Trump and Musk, they weren't always, on opposite sides.
No, definitely not. At one point, their relationship was described quite positively. Some sources even use the term bromance.
Right, a bromance. So that initial alignment seems to be the baseline the sources establish. There was a time they seemed like allies, or at least, on decent terms.
Mm-hmm. Friendly, perhaps?
But that seems to have shifted dramatically. Reports talk about a nuclear falling out. What specific event, according to the sources, seems to have really kicked that off?
Well, the sources really point to Musk's very public criticism of what he called Trump's big, beautiful bill. And Musk, he really didn't pull any punches. He labeled it a disgusting abomination. That seems to be the spark.
Wow, okay. Disgusting abomination. You can imagine Trump's reaction to that kind of language. How did he fire back, according to these reports?
Oh, swiftly and very publicly. Yeah. He called Musk crazy, suggested he had Trump derangement syndrome.
Okay.
And that exchange, it just quickly escalated into what the sources are calling an online war of words.
And it wasn't just about that one bill, was it? The fight, it kind of expanded.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. According to the sources, they started brawling over, seemingly everything. Credit for Trump's 2016 win came up.
Really?
Yeah, and even Trump's supposed past links to Jeffrey Epstein were brought into it.
Wow. That's quite a range of controversial topics to throw into the mix. And were there reports of Trump considering specific actions early on, like retaliation?
Yes, definitely. The sources mentioned discussions, maybe threats from Trump's side, things like potentially canceling billions with a B in federal contracts for SpaceX.
Billions for SpaceX, Musk's company.
Exactly. And there was even a report about Trump thinking about selling that red Tesla he'd only bought back in March.
Okay, so while this public fight was really heating up, the sources also bring in this other pretty significant element. It actually surfaced before the big fallout, but it got tangled up in it.
You mean the New York Times report?
Exactly, that bombshell report.
Right, and that dropped earlier, but it detailed some very specific, very serious allegations about Musk's substance use. Based on unnamed sources, it's important to note.
Okay, unnamed sources. What did that NYT report specifically allege? What were the claims?
Well, based on these sources, the report claimed Musk was excessively consuming drugs while he was advising the White House.
Okay.
It alleged he was regularly taking ketamine and that this was reportedly causing physical issues like bladder problems.
Right. I remember reading that detail.
The report also mentioned allegations of using ecstasy, hallucinogenic mushrooms, and it stated he was known to travel with a pill box containing Adderall, the ADHD medication.
Okay. Quite a list of allegations there. Now, it's really crucial here to include Musk's own response to these kinds of claims, as reported in the sources.
Absolutely essential. Musk has publicly acknowledged using prescribed ketamine. He's been open about that, stating it's for treating depression.
Okay, so prescribed use for depression.
Yes, but the sources indicate he strongly rejected the abuse allegations from the NYT report. He reportedly called it fake news during what turned out to be his final press conference with Trump, right there in the Oval Office.
Right. And then bringing it back to Trump's perspective, he commented more recently on whether he actually saw Musk using substances at the White House. What did the sources say, Trump said?
Well, when he was asked directly, Trump stated he was not sure. Then he added, I don't think so. I hope not.
I hope not. Okay.
He also sort of reiterated that they previously had a good relationship and that he wished Musk well, very well, actually. Kind of striking a slightly softer tone there, perhaps.
Interesting. But the sources also give us a peek behind the curtain, the perspective of people within the White House regarding Musk and these drug allegations.
Yes, reports from White House officials suggested that Trump was indeed concerned about Musk's alleged drug use. Some sources even indicated this concern was Well, one factor contributing to why the relationship ended so explosively.
So it might have played a role in the breakdown itself.
That's what some sources suggest.
Yeah.
There were also reports that Trump privately asked aides, do you think his behavior could be linked to this alleged drug use?
Mm.
And CNN specifically noted Trump's public reluctance to really comment directly on it. They quoted him saying, "I don't want to comment on his drug use. I don't know."
So you've got the public insults flying, these really serious allegations swirling, and then, according to some accounts, things even got physically tense behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. One source recounts a pretty specific incident. It was reported by Steve Bannon, the former White House strategist, and it involved Musk and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent.
Okay, Bannon's account, what reportedly happened? Where was this?
Apparently, it was right after they left an Oval Office meeting. This was back in April. Bessent and Musk had reportedly been insulting each other in the meeting.
Oh.
Okay, so according to Bannon's account, as they exited, Bessent called Musk a total fraud.
Wow.
And Bannon claims Musk then sort of pushed his shoulder into Bessent like a rugby.
But kidding, a physical push.
That's the claim. Yeah. Which then led to Bessent striking back, apparently, and several other people having to jump in and break up the scuffle.
Good grief. And what was the core of their argument in the meeting? What set them off?
Reports indicate it centered on Musk's claim. He'd claimed he found over $1 trillion in waste and abuse in government spending.
$1 trillion?
Yeah, a claim Bessent apparently disputed pretty fiercely. That seems to have been the root of the argument.
And Trump heard about this physical altercation afterwards. What was his reaction?
Yes, he reportedly heard about it. And Bannon's account says Trump's reaction was basically, "This is too much."
This is too much. Yeah, I can imagine.
A White House press secretary later reportedly just called it an unfortunate episode, kind of downplaying it.
An unfortunate episode, right? Okay, so despite all this drama, the online war, the alleged scuffle, were there any attempts to maybe de-escalate things after that initial public blow-up?
It seems so. Sources suggest that the really intense online back and forth did ease up a bit over one particular weekend. Aides on both sides were reportedly, trying to work on finding some path forward.
Trying to smooth things over behind the scenes.
Looks like it. And you also had some politicians weighing in publicly, like Vice President J.D. Vance.
Right. What did Vance say?
He reportedly expressed hope that Musk would kind of come back into the fold, even while saying Musk made a huge mistake by, going after the president like that.
Interesting. A bit of an olive branch, maybe?
Perhaps. And then Musk himself made what looked like a potentially conciliatory gesture.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
The sources note that Musk actually retweeted a post by Vance. And that post echoed Trump's call to end migrant riots in Los Angeles. So amplifying a Trump message via Vance.
Okay. A subtle signal, maybe. So, given all the threats and the drama, where does Trump actually stand now on the practical stuff, like that red Tesla or using SpaceX's Starlink?
Yeah, on those specific things, Trump seems to be taking a more pragmatic view now.
Okay.
He mentioned he might just move the Tesla, not necessarily get rid of it right away, and he confirmed his administration would keep using Starlink. He specifically noted how heavily the Defense Department relies on it.
Right, that makes sense. It's critical infrastructure.
Exactly. So, business and government needs seem to override the personal feud there, at least for now.
And what about the bigger picture? A full reconciliation with Musk. Did Trump address that possibility?
He was asked about it. He stated he hasn't really thought about it much, but he did speculate that Musk would probably want to speak with him at some point.
And would he take the call?
He said he'd have no problem with it if Musk were to call. So the door isn't completely shut, it seems.
Okay. And just lipping back quickly, the sources also revealed that the idea of the government retaliating against Musk, scrutinizing contracts, that wasn't just a public threat. It was actually discussed internally.
That's right. Administration officials reportedly did consider taking action, looking closely at Musk's various government contracts. This was apparently spurred particularly by his criticism of that big, beautiful bill and the concerns it raised about the deficit.
So real policy implications were being considered.
It appears so. It highlights the intersection of personal relationships, public criticism, and government business.
It's clearly such a multifaceted situation. You've got the public statements, the private fights, the policy stuff. Senator Ted Cruz had a pretty memorable way of describing the whole dynamic, didn't he?
He did. He reportedly compared the feud to feeling like the kids of a bitter divorce, where you're just saying, I really wish mommy and daddy would stop screaming.
Okay, let's zoom in for a moment on one specific element that became central to the allegations we discussed. Ketamine. The sources we looked at provide some really important context about this substance.
Yeah, what's fascinating here, based on these reports, is the kind of dual nature of ketamine. How it's viewed and how it's used, it's complicated.
The sources explain its established medical uses first, right?
Yes, exactly. It's described, clinically as both an anesthetic and a hallucinogen. But critically, reports note its growing use with FDA-approved forms like Spravato, available since 2019, for treating specific conditions.
Like depression?
Primarily treatment-resistant depression, yes. The sources mention the rise in clinics offering this type of treatment, and definitely an increase in prescriptions for it.
Okay, so there's a clear, recognized therapeutic application, but the sources are also very clear in differentiating this from the risks associated with abuse, correct?
Absolutely crucial distinction. The reports really highlight that while there are these legitimate therapeutic uses, recreational or excessive use carries significant risks.
What kind of risks are we talking about, according to the sources?
Well, several things. There are the dangers of mixing ketamine with other substances like ecstasy or cocaine, which sometimes come up in reports of illicit or recreational use.
Okay.
Then there are physical problems. Sources point to things like bladder and urinary tract issues, which were specifically alleged in that report about Musk, and also potential kidney damage.
Right, and mental health risks, too.
Definitely. Things like memory loss, paranoia, and those intense negative experiences people sometimes call bad trips. Users can also build up a tolerance, meaning they need higher doses for the same effect, and there is a potential for addiction, although maybe not considered as high as with some other substances.
And responsible use, the therapeutic use, is really heavily emphasized in these contexts, how it should be done.
Oh, completely. The source is discussing its therapeutic potential stress that people absolutely should not self-medicate. Safe and effective treatment, especially for something like depression, is always described as being done under the supervision of a clinical physician.
Got it, under supervision. And it's also clear there's an illicit market for ketamine, too.
Yes, reports indicate that recreational ketamine is often acquired illegally. It might come from diverted prescriptions, or it could be produced and sold illicitly.
Which raises other concerns.
Yeah, concerns about purity, what it might be mixed with, potentially other dangerous substances. You don't know what you're getting on the illicit market.
So, tying this all together, why is this context about ketamine? Its medical side, its abuse risks. Why is it so relevant to this specific deep dive into the Trump-Musk situation?
It's critical because the sources present this really complex picture. On one hand, you have Musk acknowledging prescribed use for a specific medical condition, depression.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have these reports, particularly in the New York Times, one citing unnamed sources, alleging broader abuse and potentially the use of other substances as well.
Okay, so it's that discrepancy.
Exactly. The sources really highlight this apparent discrepancy. And one piece we looked at, a Voss article, described it as navigating a blurry line between ketamine as a therapeutic tool and ketamine as a narcotic or party drug.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding this dual nature, as the sources present it, really helps frame the complexity of the allegations that became so public during this feud.
So recapping our deep dive here, we've really navigated the rapid unraveling of what was once a pretty significant relationship.
We explored the public back and forth, those serious allegations about substance use and the differing accounts surrounding them, the reported drama behind the scenes.
And that whole complex backdrop of politics and business interests that are always sort of playing underneath.
Yeah, this whole situation, when you pull together these various sources, it really underscores just how quickly dynamics can shift in these high-stakes environments with such powerful figures.
Absolutely.
And it also shows how personal health matters, or, allegations about them, especially when they come from unnamed sources, how they can potentially become weaponized, or at least central to a public narrative.
And that narrative impacts not just the individuals, but potentially broader government affairs, business dealings.
Right. It definitely raises questions about how information, and particularly allegations, gets amplified and interpreted in today's, media landscape, especially when it involves such prominent, globally recognized personalities.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. When you're faced with all this conflicting information, public statements versus claims from unnamed sources, private behaviors turning into public allegations, how do you process it all? How do you distinguish between what might be a private health matter and public behavior with real consequences? What stands out to you as the most significant or maybe the most telling detail in this whole complex picture we've unpacked?